How's this? Just, I guess I should be closer. How's that?
Oh, you're more than fine. Just speak up. Well, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, America. Welcome once again to the Meat and Potato Show, Conservative Talk and Awesome Rock. We are filming here at our Ambush Studios at Worcester, Massachusetts. And my good friend joins me, Rob Antonellis, author of the book, Culture War Cracked, Fatal Flaws Revealed. Just came out. Here's my copy here. And Rob will be joining us on the 24th at our monthly Worcester Tea Party free educational event. He'll be joining, he'll be talking about the book, putting some of the pieces of the puzzle together for the audience. You can go on his site, Saving America the Beautiful, that's savingatb.com, right?
That's right.
There we go. Sometimes it's .org. Make sure you got that right. But you're a smart audience, and if it doesn't come out right, try the other one. So savingatb.com. Ladies and gentlemen, my good friend Rob Antonellis. Rob, thank you.
Thank you very much.
How are you? Good to see you. Got lost a little bit on your way, but that's okay. That happens.
It happens.
So let's start right off. Absolutely great book. I'm not a big, I'm going to use the word, conspiracy kind of guy. I do enjoy reading these things because it's always good to have a second and third opinion, a different outlook on the way our history has unfolded for us, and the way some of the events that have happened, even just within our lifetime, sometimes it's not always the way it seems. And one of the things that you had mentioned in the book, which I do completely agree with, is the way Harvard University was set up, how Torrey Row it's right down the street from where Harvard is, and that whole area in Boston where Harvard is was basically a Tory-held area, and it was a very difficult area during the Revolution to basically either drive the British out. It was one of the areas where the British basically housed a lot of the officers and troops at the time during the Revolution. But Harvard has a lot to do with not only the direction of the way our politics have gone in the country, it's affected our education. And one of the things that I had looked up after reading the book and reading that section on Harvard University was that right after the Revolution, and a lot of Americans don't know this, we did have like Princeton University, Harvard University, there were, Yale was still being built. I don't even think it was even under construction at the time. My point is we were woefully lacking in higher education universities in the new United States. Not only were we lacking, but we were lacking American professors. And what happened almost immediately was advertisements went out to hire European-born professors who eventually came over to the new United States to start teaching in these colleges. Here's where the problem starts, and you can take it from here, is that they were teaching European-style government, European-style monarchies, parliamentary rule. They had absolutely zero understanding of this concept called the United States Constitution. This was kind of the start of it. So Rob, take it from here and tell us about Harvard and Torrey Row.
Okay, the essence of the book, when I say Culture War Cracked, is, to make it brief, the American Revolution never actually ended.
It's true. It
never actually granted us our freedom. And what actually was happening was the method of him expressing his hostilities towards, what may have been seen by him as a slave uprising.
You're talking about King George.
King George III changed from overt to covert, from battlefield to academic fortress, and from black powder, which is gunpowder,
to white powder, which is heroin and drugs, right?
Exactly. So there's the confluence of his counter-American revolution with what was happening in Asia at that time. He was 200 years ahead of his time. I was sourcing to China and India, and we're doing that now with software and almost everything.
This is true. It was a way to undermine the culture. They couldn't win on the battlefield. They couldn't even win as far as our system of government was concerned. But the culture, the people, that's the it.
And then Fortress Harvard happens to be, see, my background is industrial engineering. So I follow basically the supply chain back to England, which is the stepping stone for a lot of this opium from China, from Asia. And here we are in Boston, which is the heart of New England, which means it's the safe harbor. You want to get your opium to where? The biggest market in the world, which was New York City. But there was no Cape Cod Canal, and it was very treacherous to get around the Cape.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, they needed to go safe harbor, which is Boston, and they did not want to leave something valuable like opium on a boat, a ship overnight, or in a warehouse. So it came, I'm convinced, it went by barge or some method, by horse or barge, up the river to a safe haven. And the safe haven was Fortress Harbor,
Sure.
in the proximity of where John F. Kennedy rode crew. And Tory Row, where you have these loyalists and their homes, which are palatial, opulent, and some of them built with royal money, were beautiful safe havens for that opium to protect it on its way towards New York City.
Sure. Yeah, you do. You look at the areas. There's a main road that comes right out of where Harvard University is. I worked on a few houses there during my contracting days. I forget the name of the street. But right where the university is, I don't know, Mass Ave or something like that. Anyway, there's a ton of beautiful, like you said, palatial houses. Of course, it's all the new money in there, very liberal Democrat type of people live in that Cambridge area. But these houses were absolutely opulent. And if you've ever been to that section of Cambridge just outside where Harvard University is, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, and it was built by royal money.
Exactly.
This was pre-revolution, and then of course when the revolution was going on, I mean these are areas that just basically housed all the British troops during the occupation of Boston.
Right, and then the first and second opium wars were happening in the early 1800s. And today, if you ask anybody in the narcotics industry, they'll tell you about 80% of the illegal narcotics are consumed in America. And if you were to say, well, how about 20 years ago? They would say, oh, it's about 80%. And if anytime you go back in time, it's 80%.
It is,
and
right.
I will guarantee you that back in the day, that the British were conquering basically parts of Asia so that they could become part of their supply chain for the opium, the percentage was the same.
It was still
80%. I bet you much of that was New York City. So let me just interrupt you quickly.
Go ahead.
Back to academia, there's a chain now, as you can see, between Fortress Harvard and what I'm calling Fortress Yale, because in 1832, Skull and Bones was founded.
And you know.
And it's on the coast, which it's actually 60% by land to New York City, to Yale, but then it's on the coast, which means they could take it by land bridge they could take it from Harvard by ground to Rhode Island, where that's the cheapest way to move goods is by water. But it was coastal, it was safe, it was secure, they could hide it. On its way to Yale, which I believe was the staging area for
disseminating
New York City,
yeah.
the big market.
Some of the things you mentioned in the book, basically 9/11. And what I did not know until I started reading the book and then backing it up with a little bit more research, is that the British, and then we're going to get into we'll get into Mitt Romney and the Mormons in a minute, but there were significant things that happened on 9/11 going all the way back to the Battle of Brandywine during the Revolutionary War, which was September 11, 1777. And go ahead. And as Rob will tell, this keeps happening throughout our American history, that significant things seem to always happen on September 11th.
Exactly. I have a diagram I created. It's kind of a nerdy engineering diagram, I suppose, but it's called the 9/11 Blood Trail. And on the left-hand side, you see 6 attacks against American interests on September 11th, the most recent being, of course,
9/11, right.
Benghazi.
Yep, that's right,
And
Benghazi.
11 years prior is World Trade Center and the Pentagon. 144 years prior is Mountain Meadow Massacre. And then you have 3 that were undertaken by King George as he waged over war using black powder against American interests. So, yes, we're talking 1777. These are really important battles. Hence, they chose this date, 9/11. They had very high hopes for Brandywine. They did, in fact, successfully take Philadelphia as a result.
That's right.
So 9/11, 1777. And then 5 years later, to the day, was the end of the American Revolution. That was the final battle where they attacked Fort Henry in New York. And then fast forward to the War of 1812, and it was Fort McHenry, again on September 11th, but that was 1814. And so I think what that does is that links, I've got other things I mentioned that link the War of 1812 as an overt counter-American revolution. And the historians, that you can't ever forget, the root, the foundation of our historical thinking is Harvard.
Yes.
Fortress Harvard. They're the principal driver in, let's call it intellectual thought in our society. So they have come up with, well, the War of 1812 was kind of an offshoot of the Napoleonic Wars, and kind of like, we don't really know what the British were doing here. Well, I know. And now, and the people of Baltimore knew exactly, because they built a flag that was 42 feet. Look at the size of this flag, and think of one that's 42 feet by 30 feet tall. They built it for the sole purpose of sending a message all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, so that the king would get the message. So apparently, he never got the message between the end of the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812, and that's because he didn't ever grant us the freedoms that we thought we had won.
And the main thing that people learn about the War of 1812 is that it was primarily fought, one of the reasons because of the fact that the British were raiding our ships on the high seas. There was impressment going on, and Madison wanted to, basically, he ended up declaring war. Oddly enough, is at the same time, because there's such a distance between the two countries, and everything took months and months for just a ship to get across the ocean. The Brits had ended impressment. They had passed a law. They said no more impressment. Didn't seem to reach us, but that didn't matter. Once the war started, it was just underway, and our initial forays in the northern territories, and this is when we say the northern territories, this is around the Great Lakes region. I mean, we were just getting our hats handed to us. And September 11th, 14?
Yes.
Fort McHenry.
Fort McHenry, Baltimore, second largest city of America at that time. And the British had already burned Washington, D.C. to the ground. They had burned the White House.
Yes, I know.
The Capitol, the Library of Congress, and the Navy Yard, but they walked right past the post office. That's kind of interesting. Which I kind of think, well, they probably knew they had their own white powder already established. They didn't want to burn their own supply.
Don't burn
that building.
Got our stuff
But
in
so
there, man.
they knew they were scorched earth. They believed if they could take Baltimore, which was the second largest city of America at that time, and it was also where a lot of those merchant ship
it's a port city, right?
lived and were basically doing pirating against the British, because that was the only way we could wage a navy, was through the free enterprise system. So they despised Baltimore, and they believed they were going to take it, and they failed. And it was the next morning, September the 12th, that Francis Scott Key wrote The Star-Spangled Banner.
Now let's move forward. September 11th, and there was a massacre committed by the Mormons against Christians.
Yes.
How does that tie in now?
Okay, here's how that ties in. I'll do it in two ways. First is, as I mentioned, Skull and Bones was formed in 1832, and that's part of the narcotics pipeline between, China, England, New England, Boston, Fortress Harvard, Fortress Yale, New York City. That was the market. So, in 1830, 2 years prior, one of the other cults the British formed to promote their interests in America was the Mormons.
Really?
And the Book of Mormon has a chapter 9, verse 11. And it's, I call it the Mormon Jihad chapter, because this one sentence will make you realize they're not Christian. This is not anything that God would say. And here it is. I did send down fire and destroy them, that their wickedness and abominations might be hid from before my face. And I hear that, and when I hear those words, and I actually close my eyes and think about people jumping out of the World Trade Center towers.
Sure, that's right.
It seems like, from their perspective, it was really the fulfillment of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I say Mitt Romney taught 9/11 theology, well, he did. From
Yeah.
1966
Sure,
to
he did.
1969, he was on ministerial deferment from the Vietnam War, and he was over in France as a Mormon. But so as an author named Anton Chaikin has revealed that that the Mormons are a synthetic religion. In fact, it's connected to, it's a front
Mm-hmm.
for CIA and MI6 recruiting. So they recruit on campus to, to promote the Book of Mormon and biblical whatever. But in reality, they're sending you as so-called ambassadors around the world to represent what really amounts to British interests.
And you look at the history of our presidents and many of the people who served in higher offices of our government, everyone has either a Harvard or a Yale background. It's kind of like it's like, where do you go? I'll just go to Harvard and Yale. Everybody's got that background. Even George Bush was a Yale guy. Scalia was a Harvard guy. Of course, Clinton claimed to be an Oxford person, but even that's still the same connection right there.
Well, yeah, I talked extensively about what I call the BRC, which is the British Royal Crown.
Yes.
And I also call it the Bloody Royal Crown. But I also point out, it may be coincidental, it may not be. The political dynasty that runs the world, in this country at least,
Mm-hmm.
is the Bush-Romney-Clinton
There you go.
political dynasty, and that just happens to be BRC. Now, these people that worship numbers, murder by digits, shapes like triangles are really important to them.
Certainly right. No, you're right. My wife and I were talking about that. We were talking about threes and how, the numerology has a lot of people really put a lot of symbology into that.
Exactly. They do the same with their names. As time, generations pass, names change. And so I think it's kind of interesting, and I don't know if it's related at all, but Mitt Romney, speaking of the Declaration of Independence, and John Hancock, who was a famous, of course, merchant,
Mm-hmm.
beloved politician and merchant in Boston, had a ship by the name of USS Liberty. I don't know if you're familiar with this.
Keep going. I am.
This is, USS Liberty, and it was attacked by a British ship by the name of HMS, which means His Majesty,
Yeah.
or HMS Romney. The HMS Romney was impressing his sailors to become, basically part of the kingdom. And so it's just interesting.
And it is interesting, and even if, again, as I said in the beginning of the interview, I'm not a big conspiracy kind of person. The reason why I do enjoy educating myself on this, because sometimes things are just too coincidental to just not be true. That there's got to be some sort of link that's going on in there. And as much as I'm not really into 9/11 being, I'm talking about 9/11/2001 being an inside job, there's just too much coincidence. There's just too many stars aligning, if you want to use the word. There's just too much of that going on to not take a second or a third look at maybe a different type of opinion to try to explain, or at least try to understand why these things keep happening. And it makes me wonder, now, if you look at the different things, there's like 144 years between Brandywine, Henry, the Mormon massacre, and then we go into 9/11 itself. Things obviously changed with Benghazi in 2012, and I'm reading the book right now, 13 Hours in Benghazi. They're staying away from the political end of it. They're just talking about what happened there on the ground. But I'm wondering if now, because 9/11 has such numerical significance now, that maybe we should expect things practically almost every September 11th from here on out.
Well, no, I think they're much more methodical than that. Let me talk about the number 11.
Go ahead.
Twin phallic symbols.
Yeah, and the Twin Towers, sure.
And the Twin Towers, and it's not a coincidence, but we dial 911 when our house is on fire, and America dialed 911 when the Twin Towers were on fire, in the shape of an 11. The buildings were each 110 stories tall. Benghazi was 11 years after the World Trade Center tower. The number 11 is just much too significant in all this. And when it comes to, conspiracies, and when you start adding up the details, because that's what I do. I mean, as an engineer, I add this up and
Yeah, you look at the facts and you
prove it.
add it all together,
Well,
right?
let's just talk about conspiracy here when it comes to, did Bush know? And was Bush involved? Where was he on September the 10th? Well, by some strange coincidence, my niece's husband, they weren't married at the time, but he was the waiter for George Bush
Really?
on September the 10th in Sarasota, Florida.
Right.
And I saw him at Christmas time, and I just was curious because you can't find these kind of details on the web. So I asked him about that night. He goes, "Yeah, Jeb was down there." So Jeb and Bush were sitting opposite each other at a table for 12. A bunch of congressmen were there. And it's all very interesting because in Sarasota, Florida, were the families, the very extremely wealthy Saudi families, the ones that had got
This is true. That got flown out.
They got
right.
flown out. So why would, if they were expecting George Bush to give them closing the airspace for them, wouldn't they want approval? Like the day before? Like in other words, shake your hand, seal the deal.
Yeah, we'll get
like,
you out of
we're
here.
going to push, is it a go? Are we on? So, and on that day, September the 10th, I learned, during the Republican debates that Chris Christie was nominated to be the Attorney General or the federal attorney to New Jersey on that day. And I think that was Bush down there doing his, whether you want to call it pre-9/11 planning or planning for post-9/11. That was the day he did that. And it turned out that 7 weeks prior to September 11th, the ownership of the World Trade Center went from New Jersey Port Authority to Silverstein Properties.
To a private company, right?
Yeah, so there's going to be legal issues that need to be, if that were really a planned insurance fraud, which I can't see any other explanation really. When you add up enough of these variables, it becomes too coincidental. Exactly.
Right. I mean, coincidence is one thing, but when things just are too coincidental, it forces you to take a second or a third look at it.
Can I just interrupt one?
Go ahead.
With this number 11, because this is a very big number. And I started doing even more research. I mean, since I've written the book, I keep going because it's very interesting. And I start seeing curiosities, because I say in the book, not only did I crack the culture war, but I actually cracked the crack house. So I talk about my free market solutions to ending the drug war. But the number 11, I think I even went further and dug into Karl Marx. And do you know where he was living when he wrote the...
Go ahead.
London.
Oh,
do you know who published it?
This is
a British publishing company. And he wrote it while he was in exile with a bunch of others, communists that were in exile, and they were in London.
You talk about drugs. I just finished seeing a documentary with the Northborough Tea Party, the Clinton Chronicles. And Clinton, when he was governor of Arkansas, had a huge drug ring going on. Everything was coming in from the Caribbean, from Cuba, from Mexico, everything being flown in. So again, even there's that connection. I mean, they were bringing in heroin, they were bringing in cocaine, and their hands are just so dirty with all of this.
Let me just finish that one last statement about the number 11.
Go ahead.
Queen Victoria, just because she was a woman doesn't mean she's nice. I show several cases of genocide that she's directly involved in, but it may be coincidence, but do you know when the Communist Manifesto was published?
I'm going to say 1911.
Oh, no.
No,
1848. And that just happens to be her 11th year as queen. And I thought, maybe it was a gift to her.
And when was the Mormon massacre?
Well, that was 1857.
Okay.
So that was all, later. However, it's just all very interesting. So I think that when you crack the culture war, that means communism and the tenets of, countries that we now consider our enemies, friends, that they're built on the same mass murder that has actually is it actually currently challenging all of our freedoms in America?
Why do you think these people are so hell-bent on this mass murder? Maybe your own opinion.
A population reduction.
Population reduction.
They have a very specific, Queen Elizabeth, currently the Queen.
Well, even the UN.
Her husband.
The UN, Soros, Rockefeller, Carnegie, not Carnegie, but the Ford Foundation, all these people that are involved in the Bilderbergers, that's all of it. What is it? They want like a $400 million population of the world or something like that?
Something small. But it's also something, a couple of words I only heard just recently, a couple of weeks ago, and I think it's been going on for thousands of years, using deception and bloodshed to maintain control.
Sure.
But to continue on about the Clintons and the drugs, I'm going to quote Bill O'Reilly. And he said something great. You were talking about the cocaine. It was primarily cocaine at that point, coming into Mena, Arkansas. And it was George Bush. It was the CIA. And the guns for, whatever, Nicaraguas. That's what all that was.
Yes, where it was all
I mean, I
done.
shouldn't say all, to trivialize it. But at that time, recently, Bill O'Reilly was saying that, actually this was years ago, that it was Mena, Arkansas was the largest cocaine transshipment spot in the Western Hemisphere.
There were landed planes in the field out there, left and right.
Exactly.
And the state police knew about it. The state police were even like part of the transportation off the planes, the various warehouses and processing places. Oh, sure, yeah.
Right. So then,
this was around 87, 88. Bush got into office. What happened in 89? The Panama invasion. So this is all, and of course, Clinton is still governor at this time while all this is going on.
right, and then it continued as the primary until, well, if you think into Clinton's presidency, there was this period of time when there was a lot of violence in Haiti, and the drug dealers were killing each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so what his solution was, what? Send in the Marines. And then there was also this squabble because he was having Marines at the homes of drug dealers taking out garbage. And that's odd.
What was?
And let me just tell you this.
What was in those bags?
What else did Bill O'Reilly say? Fast forward like 10 years, because I was watching Bill O'Reilly off and on for many years, I guess. And I luckily heard him say that, Haiti is the largest cocaine transshipment spot in the Western Hemisphere. So I'm thinking it follows Bill Clinton. Anywhere Bill Clinton goes, the cocaine follows him.
And look at what else is going on in Haiti. You've got Hillary Clinton's brother, who supposedly is president of some gold mining operation down in there. You've got the Clinton Global Initiative that is primarily focused on Haiti, supposedly fixing Haiti, the recovery, but you can go to Haiti today, it still looks the same it did right after the earthquake many years ago. It looks absolutely no different today. So where's all that money going? So all these people are down there in Haiti for that purpose.
Exactly. So that's I want to make that connection that it was Bill O'Reilly said these two cities, Mena, well not cities but two locations. One was Mena as the primary for many, I think decades. But then as soon as the Marines went in, he didn't say this, but I just said, oh. The Marines have been there, shortly thereafter he said, oh, Haiti is the largest in the world, in the Western Hemisphere, and that's when I put the two together. There's no, he's sending the Marines to take garbage from, okay, so let me continue with my theory then. Of course don't you think that the CIA has the ability to, if they want to smuggle drugs, and they have the access to all these military planes all over the world in ships.
It's also a way of funding. And I've done other research into this. It's a way of them covertly funding some of their covert operations.
Yes.
Rather than going to Congress and saying, we need $1 billion to do this operation. Congress is going to say, no, that ain't going to happen because we're not going to give you permission to do that operation. So how do they get the money? How do they get that funding? They've got to come up with a covert way to get the money to fund their covert operations. How best to do that?
Period.
Seriously, how best to do that? So towards the end of the book, you go into a section where, not only have you revealed this and put these things together, you start talking about ways to start solving this problem, or at least cut through the fog of everything that's going on. Once you get into that, start talking about some of that.
Okay.
And where do we go from
Okay,
here?
because I'm glad you
question.
asked that question, because it's true. It's not all negative. In fact, I don't like to bring problems. I bring solutions, and I'm that way at work and so forth. That's what I deliver solutions. But in order to understand like the solution, you got to understand the problem. So that's all we've been doing, is understanding the problem. That now leads us to the solution. The solution is for as many Americans as possible to read this book and to get active. It's only 98 pages, and start the discussion. I've got a discussion group at Culture War Crack, Facebook, Culture War Crack discussion. The book is on Amazon.com. I've got a Kindle version there. I've got a free PDF at 911bloodtrail.com. But the point is that this book can bring us to the day where soon, very, very soon, with the speed of social, viral marketing, and social media,
viraling the information,
everything, that we can bring this book well before there's any kind of election, to see it's time to bring some serious indictments. Like, for example, the Clintons. If somebody has a proven record of lying about everything, which of course I think you can see Hillary does that.
Sure.
And then one of the women that Bill raped said something about, the pillow talk was, Hillary would kill anybody. And so, like, the question is, how far does that go? I've already accused, I think I did, clearly enough, that Benghazi was an inside operation.
Of course it was.
How far does it go? Life has no meaning. Human life,
except for them,
at least,
right?
Except for their lives.
Except for their lives, right?
And so that makes it a lot easier to understand the claim. It's a very powerful story about a blood scandal in Arkansas that's been buried, and then I describe very clearly who built this real iron curtain that keeps people that are listening right now from knowing anything about what I'm talking about, because the history books were written by the people that came from the British assault on our freedoms. So the Clinton blood scandal was a 14-year effort by Bill and Hillary Clinton to maintain, I call it the homebrew HIV bioweapons lab. In fact, that's what I call it. Because for 14 long years, they maintained, he as governor, she at the Rose Law Firm, maintained the blood supply that was coming as many as 60,000 units per week coming from the prisons 14 years after it was known that that's a very dangerous crowd to get.
Well, this was mentioned in the Clinton Chronicles that I saw the other night. Yeah, their connection to the prisons, right?
Good.
And experimentation, sure, right.
Yeah, and I've got, in my book, I point the reader to Google a very specific movie trailer. The movie was called Factor 8, because that was the name of the medical product, the blood product that ended up causing the death of most Canadian hemophiliacs.
That's right.
They died because of Clinton's blood made it into the pharmaceutical industry and caused these people to die. Excuse me. So many years later, the government of Canada brought a lawsuit against the United States because of all those wrongful deaths.
Yes.
And the president at the time just kicked it out, and that was William Jefferson Clinton.
It's in the movie. It's in Clinton Chronicles.
Yeah.
I saw that, and I'm watching this movie, and I thought about you, and I thought, hey, well, it's good. He's coming in back into the studio, and thank you for mentioning that. These people have this. If you, not to get away from the book Culture War Crack, but the Clinton Chronicles. If you watch that documentary, anybody who tries to investigate anything that the Clintons have done mysteriously end up dead. And you'll see in the movie how they just list name after name after name. And these just aren't people like you, me, or the guy next door trying to uncover something. No, these are people that actually are like prosecutors and lawyers and people in various positions of the Arkansas government. And of course journalists, prominent journalists in the area at the time. So it's not just some, some guy on the street or some whack job who has some crazy conspiracy theory. These are people who have been uncovering all of this evidence, who suddenly, for some strange reason, end up dead.
Right.
And of course, the forensic people, they say, oh, it was accidental. He died of natural cause. And it's always swept under the rug. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, it's okay. I am absolutely convinced that the blood scandal is something they consider to be their true Achilles heel. If word gets out about the poison blood scandal, the emails, and even everything that she's what she's hiding about Benghazi, which is what I just mentioned, is what she's really hiding, would really pale when you consider there's 600 babies born each day with HIV. There's 39 million dead, and even in my book I listed Clinton as number 4 in a list of 5 known mass murderers, based on just my engineering understanding of contagious disease and how it spreads when you're actively pumping out blood, poison blood, and spreading it into populations and through the world, which wouldn't be exposed to it. So my list was Mao Zedong, Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler, Bill Clinton, and Pol Pot.
Right, they're all the same.
Right.
Now, why do you think, do you see a link with everything that we just talked about to how not only the mass media, but the establishment Republicans and the establishment Democrats just hammering away at Donald Trump? Is somebody like a Donald Trump, they see him as an actual threat who could possibly maybe expose all of this? Because even he himself, with all his money and his influence, that he himself might know something because he's associated himself with some of these people.
I think he knows a lot more than he mentions. I think with his attack on John McCain, it's not about whether John McCain was a POW. The reality is John McCain committed high treason as a POW.
Right.
So I believe, I think the thing they fear is the loss of the power to investigate. Because it's a one-party system. I think that's pretty obvious.
Sure.
Clinton, and I just described the power structure, BRC, Bush, Romney, Clinton, and now look, you might not think of Romney as being all that important, but he basically got the Speaker of the House to be
that's right.
elected.
Yep, but that's right. That whole connection between him being the vice president, the VP pick, now
He's actively...
and he's actively acting like a rhino is what he's acting.
Yes. And you look at the Gang of Eight and their connection to John McCain, high treason. That's why I call them the Gang of Hate.
Yeah. And of course, what's happening with part of our illegal immigration? Drugs are pouring across the border. They're pouring across left and right.
Exactly. Now, when it comes to the blood scandal, because I want to come back to that, I think they consider it to be their true Achilles heel. And the reason I suspect that is there's a movie called Factor 8, but it's not, has nothing to do with the blood scandal. In fact, there was a documentary. There was a blood additive called Factor 8, and then a hero by the name of Kelly Duda from Arkansas risked his own life for 3 years, I think, to make a documentary that won documentary of the year, and that happened during the Clinton administration about the poison blood scandal, and that is called Factor 8. And then now, if you Google Factor 8, you're going to see a movie about some action, and that's Hollywood trying to cover it up. They did the same with Fast and Furious. There's a movie called Fast and Furious.
It's about covering
nothing to do with
the real Fast and Furious.
Exactly.
Sure. What you had mentioned about Googling some of this information. In the book, he mentions in several passages, as Rob is talking about some of the things and tying history together, he says in several chapters, Google, just look this stuff up. One of the things I wrote in my review of the book is Rob tells you, go do your homework. You don't believe me? Go do your homework. Look this stuff up. Do your own information. It's one of the things I did as I was reading the book. And it's just absolutely amazing the way seemingly unrelated events throughout history, Rob's able to tie them all together and start creating this thread. Again, just Google the stuff that he mentions in the book. Do your own homework on this, and you'll enlighten yourself. We were just talking about the book and some of the other things. I had just seen the Clinton Chronicles. Just in our conversation right here, we're able to tie all of that together. Again, it's too coincidental not to pay attention to.
Right. Now getting back to, like, okay, well, what do we do now?
What do we do now?
So, once we can get discussion going, because that's what I'm pointing people to, Culture War Cracked -discussion on Facebook, because I want to have a discussion forum there, and I'll start to have events where I can have direct contact during specific time frames to talk about the things that we can do as you start to develop an understanding of the critical importance of Harvard University and what I call the real Iron Curtain, which hides things they don't want you to know about, and then the echo chamber, which is how they use contacts of their own to basically dramatically amplify the effectiveness of their message to tell you what they want you to think. So they're ramming the narrative down your throat. And I made some connection that I thought was quite interesting, and I think maybe true, with the British connection to China and Chinese culture and the British military being so critically important in the formation of this thing that we know of as the Culture War, this counter-American revolution, that something, if you think back about the purpose of a gong, I don't know if you know, a gong is like a symbol, and in the early days, like 800 years ago, the Chinese discovered that if, a few farmers had enough of these gongs and crash them together, they can scare away an army. If they know the terrain well enough, so they can send the sound over the hill.
So it sounds like thousands of troops moving, right?
Exactly. So what you have, for 200 years, these people have been waging war against a free people. And it's a tiny percentage of America is controlling the vast majority of America. And they're using exactly that same technique through this echo chamber.
Yeah, I see where you're going.
To amplify who they are and then to express political correctness. So I have explained exactly what political correctness is in the book and the thought police, and it all ties in. And political correctness I've sometimes described as the king's dungeon turned inside out. And that means, he couldn't get the signers of the Constitution into his dungeon. But with political correctness, it's like there's a virtual chain. So he went virtual.
Virtual chains.
It's a virtual chain that links to his basement, and it hooks around every one of us, and we all willingly allow it. And that's what allows it to continue to have its effectiveness. And then when it comes to...
It does.
Yeah, when it comes to who are the thought police, the Nancy Pelosi's of the world, they're the guards. They're the prison guards. They come downstairs with the metal, and they jingle the keys to remind you, you're behind the bar, I have the keys.
That's right.
You're my slave.
And look how far it's gotten with even a simple term like all lives matters compared to Black Lives Matters. That, the narrative that's being forced down our throat, that somehow saying something as benign as, well, everyone's life matters. I'm sorry, this is just a fact. That becomes a racist form of hate speech.
Yes, and King George III would be so smiling from his grave. He could not shred the Constitution.
Right.
In order to shred the Constitution, he needed to beat us on the battlefield. He couldn't do that. His military devised this use of academia and the opium trade, and the media and free speech to destroy our Constitution. So the way to do it is to have Americans be the ones burning the American flag, shredding the Constitution, American students signing a petition to remove the First Amendment and the Second Amendment. But the Second Amendment is key to all of this.
Even having professors, and they just fired that professor, what is it, Michigan University, I think it was, that it's all over YouTube about how she tried to chase away somebody from the local student press. She ended up getting fired. That even in people of academia, in their minds, that no, we control what the narrative is, and we're going to control what gets out there, and we'll let you know if we approve of what you film or not. Very dangerous trend that's going on in our nation today. We're coming up to the top of the hour. Culture War Crack, Fatal Flaws Revealed. Give those websites one more time. The discussion thing and Saving ATB.
Okay, my website is savingatb.com, stands for America the Beautiful. And you can go to Amazon for the book. And on Facebook, you can join my discussion group. It's Culture War Crack-discussion.
Rob, thank you so much for coming back once again. Can't wait to see you on the 24th.
Okay.
You'll be with us at the Tea Party, our monthly event, free educational event on the 24th down on Water Street, at the Canal Bar here in Worcester, Massachusetts. The Meat and Potato Show, conservative talk and awesome rock.